The last person to live in Vulture City moved out in 1942. He didn't say goodbye to anyone because there was no one left to say it to. He locked the door behind him, out of habit, probably, since there was nothing left worth stealing, and drove out through the Sonoran Desert without looking back. That was over 80 years ago. The door is still there. The lock is still there. And the things that happened inside that town before he left are still there too. Most people in Arizona have no idea any of it exists. Arizona is the fifth largest state in America. 113,000 square miles of desert, canyon, mountain, and high plateau. Most of that land has never had a road through it. What that means, practically, is that entire chapters of human history have had the space to be written and then completely lost. Today, we are going through 11 of them. 11 towns across this state, silver camps, copper company towns, border outposts, and one site near a canyon in Graham County that witnessed something the United States government spent over a century not wanting to talk about. We are saving that one for last. It earned that position. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button. We uncover forgotten places every week. Let's go. Number 11. Goldfield, Maricopa County. Drive east out of Phoenix on the Apache Trail, and the Superstition Mountains will rise in front of you like something from a fever dream. Jagged, red, completely inhospitable. That is where Goldfield sits, or what is left of it. In 1892, a prospector named George Young pulled rich gold ore from a shaft in the shadow of those mountains, and within months, an entire town materialized out of the desert. By 1893, Goldfield had a saloon, a boarding house, a meat market, a blacksmith, and over $4,000 in gold coming out of the ground every week. For a boomtown, it moved fast. Then the ore vein pinched out, just like that. By 1896, the miners were gone. A second rush in 1910 brought a few hundred people back for about 3 years before the same thing happened again. The desert does not negotiate. Today, what you find at Goldfield is part reconstruction and part genuine ruin, tumble-down stone and timber structures leaning into the wind. The Superstition Mountains loom behind it all, completely unchanged. A reminder that the mountains were here long before anyone came looking, and they will be here long after. Number 10. Gleason, Cochise County. Head into the Dragoon Mountains in southeastern Arizona, and you will pass through terrain that feels like the edge of the world. That is where Gleason grew, quietly, stubbornly, out of a turquoise mine that the Apaches had worked for centuries before any white settler arrived. John Gleason established the formal mining operation in 1900, and the town that followed had a hospital, a jail, several saloons, and a school. Turquoise gave way to copper, and copper kept the population above 1,000 for the better part of 2 decades. It was never glamorous, but it was alive. Then the copper price collapsed in the 1930s. The mines shut down. The hospital closed. The school closed. People left in stages, the way people always do when an economy dies slowly, a few families at a time, until the ones remaining could count themselves on one hand. Walk through Gleason today, and you will find the old jail still standing, so its stone walls thick enough to last another 100 years. The hospital is a shell. The school is gone. The turquoise the Apaches first pulled from this ground is still in here somewhere. Nobody is left to find it. Number 9. Maury, Santa Cruz County. Some towns never had a chance from the beginning. Maury is one of them. Sylvester Maury was a West Point graduate, an officer, and a man with political ambitions who became convinced that the silver deposits in the Santa Cruz Mountains of southern Arizona would make him rich and powerful. In 1859, he purchased what became known as the Maori Mine, built a smelter, constructed adobe buildings, and turned a stretch of high desert into a functioning operation pulling lead and silver from the earth. Then came the Civil War, and with it, Maori's undoing. He was a Southerner by sympathy, openly so, at exactly the wrong moment in American history. In 1862, he was arrested by Union forces on charges of supplying the Confederacy with lead from his own mine, which was an accusation he denied but could not disprove. His property was seized. He was imprisoned for months without trial. By the time he was released, the mine had been stripped and the business was gone. Maori spent the rest of his short life, he died in 1871, trying to reclaim what had been taken. He never did. The adobe ruins of his operation are still standing in the high desert, slowly returning to the earth. The mine that was supposed to make him a senator made him a prisoner instead. Number 8. Dos Cabezas, Cochise County. The name means two heads in Spanish, a reference to the twin granite peaks that rise above the town like sentinels. Dos Cabezas sits in the Sulphur Springs Valley, and for a time in the 1870s and 1880s, that valley was some of the most dangerous ground in the American Southwest. Apaches raided the stage lines, outlaws worked the roads, and yet people stayed because the mail had to move and the gold had to move and someone had to do that work. Dos Cabezas was a Butterfield overland mail stop, then a gold mining camp, then a small but functional community with a post office, a store, and enough residents to call itself a town. It sat at the intersection of several routes that mattered. Then the Southern Pacific Railroad came through and went through Wilcox instead, 12 miles to the north. Just like that, every route that mattered stopped mattering in Dos Cabezas. The stage lines rerouted. The freight moved differently. The post office eventually closed. The two granite peaks are still there, watching over a scattering of old stone buildings and adobe walls slowly dissolving back into the valley floor. The roads that used to lead somewhere still lead to Dos Cabezas. They just don't lead anywhere else anymore. Number 7. Swansea, La Paz County. There is remote, and then there is Swansea. The drive into what is left of this copper town requires a dirt road through the Buckskin Mountains in western Arizona. The kind of road that makes you reconsider the relationship between your vehicle and its warranty. But in 1909, when the Clara Consolidated Gold and Copper Mining Company built a town out here from nothing, the remoteness was beside the point. There was copper underground, and copper was worth moving mountains for. Swansea, named after the copper-smelting city in Wales, grew fast. A smelter, a railroad spur, a post office, homes for the workers, a school. Now, at its peak, it housed several hundred people who had all agreed, implicitly, that the paycheck was worth the isolation. The company built it. The company owned it. The company was the town. By 1924, the copper ore had thinned past the point of profitability. The company did not negotiate or wind down gracefully. It simply left. Equipment was pulled out. The railroad spur was abandoned. The workers and their families packed what they could carry and walked away from houses they did not own. The Swansea ruins are now managed by the Bureau of Land Management. Adobe walls stand at various stages of collapse. The smelter stack still rises from the desert floor. Drive out there, and the silence is total. No highway noise, no aircraft, nothing. Just the ruins and the Buckskin Mountains, and the sound of wind moving through structures that were never meant to outlast the company. If you're finding these fascinating, go ahead and hit that like button. We're getting into the really dark stuff now, and it only gets stranger from here. Number 6. Harshaw, Santa Cruz County. David Harshaw found silver in the Patagonia Mountains in 1875 and built a life around it, and then a town around that life. At its peak in the early 1880s, Harshaw had 2,000 residents, a smelter producing over $1 million in silver annually, and all the infrastructure that kind of money generates: hotels, saloons, a newspaper, a Catholic church. It was, briefly, one of the most productive silver operations in the Arizona Territory. Then fire came through in 1882 and took most of it. Not a metaphorical fire, an actual one that burned the heart of the town to ash. Some people rebuilt. The silver was still there. But the fire had broken something: the confidence, the momentum, and when silver prices collapsed in the 1890s, following the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, Harshaw never recovered. Fire came again in 1903 and finished the job. There is a small cemetery in Harshaw where the headstones tell the story better than any history book. Miners who died young, children who did not survive infancy in the high desert, a few prominent names from the boom years, now weathered past legibility. The mountains around Harshaw still hold silver. Nobody has found a reason to go after it. Number 5. Ruby, Santa Cruz County. Ruby is illegal to visit without a permit. That should tell you something. The town sits in a valley near the Mexican border, accessible only by a road that climbs through country so rugged and remote that when 4 people were murdered there in 2 separate incidents in 1920, at the general store by bandits crossing the border, the news took days to reach anyone who could do anything about it. Ruby was that far from everything. It had been a mining camp since the 1870s under various names, processing gold and silver ore through a succession of owners until the Eagle Peacher Mining Company took over in 1926 and rebuilt it into a real company town. Concrete buildings, a school, a swimming pool, a baseball diamond. At its peak, Ruby housed about 1,200 people and was processing millions in ore per year. The swimming pool, out there in the Sonoran Desert near the border, is one of those details that stays with you. The ore ran out in 1941. Eagle Peacher left. Yet within a few years, Ruby was empty, and unlike most ghost towns, it has remained in private hands, carefully preserved, carefully gated, accessible only on scheduled tours. Stand at those sealed mine shafts and think about what the earth gave up here, and at what cost. 4 people murdered at a general store, a swimming pool in the desert, a border that made the entire enterprise feel like it was happening at the edge of the known world. Because it was. Number 4. Vulture City, Maricopa County. Henry Wickenburg found gold in the Vulture Mountains in 1863 and founded the richest gold mine in the history of the Arizona Territory. He named it the Vulture Mine, which, in retrospect, was either darkly prophetic or deeply honest about the nature of what would follow. At its peak in the 1880s, Vulture City had over 5,000 residents, a post office, a school, a boarding house, and the full economic infrastructure of a town built entirely around a single hole in the ground. The mine produced roughly 200,000 ounces of gold and 110,000 ounces of silver over its lifetime, numbers that translate to tens of millions of dollars in today's money. But gold brings out the worst in people. High grading, stealing ore directly from the mine, was so rampant that management began hanging thieves from a nearby mesquite tree. 18 men were hanged from that tree, and fared no better than the men who stole, fared no better than the men who stole from him. He was cheated out of his own mine through a fraudulent sale, declared bankruptcy, and in 1905, at the age of 85, he shot himself in a field outside the town that bore his name. Vulture City is open for tours today. You can walk through the assay office, the mess hall, the jail. You can stand under the hanging tree. The ghost town circuit has a category for places that feel genuinely dark. Not photogenic ruin dark, but something terrible happened. Here, dark. Vulture City is in that category. Number 3. Oatman, Mojave County. Oatman is not entirely dead. That is what makes it strange. Gold was discovered here in 1915 in the Black Mountains along the Colorado River, and what followed was a full-scale rush. By 1921, the Oatman mines had produced over 1.8 million ounces of gold. The town had 10,000 residents at its peak. Clark Gable and Carol Lombard spent their honeymoon night at the Oatman Hotel in 1939, which is the kind of detail that a place holds on to long after everything else is gone. Then Route 66 was bypassed. In 1953, when Interstate 40 punched through the Mojave to the north, it took the traffic and the economy with it. Oatman went from 10,000 people to a handful almost overnight. The mines had already closed in 1942, ordered shut by the federal government during World War II because gold mining was deemed non-essential to the war effort. The two blows together should have finished it. But Oatman did not entirely die. A few hundred people stayed. And the burros, descendants of the pack animals the miners had turned loose when the mines closed, stayed too. They wander the main street today. They stop traffic. Tourists feed them. The whole arrangement is completely absurd and somehow completely right. Oatman is a ghost town that refused to be a ghost town. The buildings are old and the economy is thin, and the burros have more confidence than anything else in town. But it is still there. Stay with us. Our number 1 entry has a story that most Americans have never been told, and a history this country spent over a century trying to erase. Number 2. Stanton, Yavapai County. This placer gold was discovered in the Antelope Creek drainage near Prescott in 1863, and the camp that formed around that discovery went through several names before it became Stanton. The name change alone should have been a warning. Charles P. Stanton arrived in the 1870s, not as a miner, but as a merchant and storekeeper. He was educated, charming, and patient, in a way that men who are planning something tend to be. Over the course of several years, Stanton arranged the deaths of at least 3 men who stood between him and control of the town's commercial activity. He did not do the killing himself. He hired it done through associates with connections to the Tonto Apaches and the Mexican border. He was that calculated about it. By 1875, Stanton effectively controlled the town. He renamed it after himself. He ran the post office, the store, and the social life of the community with the confidence of a man who knew no one could prove anything. He was right for a time. Then, in 1886, a group of Mexican bandits rode into town and shot Charles Stanton dead in front of his own store. The historical record is ambiguous about whether this was robbery, revenge, or both. The Arizona Treasure Hunters Association eventually purchased the land, and the old adobe buildings are still standing. Thick walls, collapsed roof lines, shown a landscape that feels heavier than it should. Gold is still in those creek beds. People still pan for it. Charles Stanton's name is still on the town. Some legacies are harder to erase than the man himself. Number 1. Camp Grant, Aravipa Canyon, Graham County. This is not a ghost town in the conventional sense. There are no saloons here, no stamping mills, no collapsed hotels. What happened at Camp Grant in April of 1871 left behind something harder to see and harder to look away from. The Aravaipa Apache, a band of several hundred people led by a chief named Eskiminzin, had surrendered peacefully to the United States Army at Camp Grant in early 1871. They had been promised protection. They had agreed to remain near the camp, to be counted, to live under Army supervision. In exchange, they received food rations and the guarantee of safety. The arrangement had been in place for weeks. It was working. On the night of April 28, 1871, a group of approximately 150 men, Anglo-Americans, Mexican-Americans, and Tohono O'odham warriors operating together, rode out of Tucson toward Aravaipa Canyon. They had organized this expedition openly in Tucson, with the knowledge of the territorial government. The territorial governor knew. The local Indian agent tried to stop it and failed. The army did not intervene. They arrived at the Apache camp before dawn. Most of the men were away hunting. The people in the camp were women, children, and elders. The attack lasted less than 30 minutes. When it was over, between 100 and 144 Aravaipa Apache people were dead. The exact number was never determined because the bodies were mutilated beyond counting. 29 Apache children were taken captive and distributed among Tucson families as domestic servants. The camp was destroyed. The men who carried out the massacre were arrested and tried in Tucson. The jury deliberated for 19 minutes before returning a verdict of not guilty. The Tucson newspapers celebrated. Camp Grant itself, the military post, was later relocated and eventually abandoned. The site near Aravaipa Canyon is remote today, accessible by a long dirt road through canyon country that is among the most beautiful and least visited in Arizona. The Aravaipa Canyon Wilderness is managed by the Bureau of Land Management. Hikers go there for the wildlife, over 200 species of birds, black hawks, cottonwoods along the creek. The history of what happened in this canyon in 1871 is not on any trailhead sign. Eskiminzin survived. Some of his family survived. He spent the remainder of his life in cycles of imprisonment and uneasy peace, never fully trusted by the government that had promised him protection, and then stood aside while his people were killed. He died in 1894. The Camp Grant massacre is one of the best documented atrocities of the American West. It was investigated by President Grant, who called it purely murder. Vincent Collier, a peace commissioner, called it the most purely horrible act he had ever encountered. And then the country moved on. The reason you were never meant to find this place has nothing to do with geography. It has to do with shame. The Aravaipa Creek still runs through the canyon where Camp Grant stood. The cottonwoods are still there. Black hawks nest in them every spring. People go to that canyon now to watch birds, to cool off in the water, to get away from the heat. The trailhead sign tells you about the wildlife and the geology. It does not tell you what happened there in April of 1871. Arizona has 113,000 square miles to hide things in. These 11 places are proof that it has used every inch. If you have been enjoying this journey, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss our next exploration. Let me know in the comments, have you visited any of these places? Or is there an Arizona ghost town we missed that deserves to be on this list? Until next time, keep exploring the forgotten places.